Chairman, we're now live.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to those attending and also to our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. This is a meeting of the Resident Services Select Committee, and my name is Councillor Bridges, and I'm the Chairman of this meeting. The key role of this committee is to monitor the performance of local public services within its remit and to hold in-depth reviews on topics of resident interest. We engage with a range of external witnesses in our activity, which can include community groups, residents and subject matter experts. Where we identify areas for change or improvement, we make recommendations to the decision-making cabinet. Details of the business to be considered today is shown on the agenda, copies of which are available in the room and also accessible on YouTube underneath the broadcast. For those present in the room and intending to speak, please note that you'll be filmed and any statements you make will be recorded and made public. And for those in the public gallery this evening, you will not be on camera. A reminder to councillors, officers and those speaking today that you should turn the microphone button on when speaking. This will ensure you can be heard in the room and by those watching online. Couple of housekeeping rules. We're not expecting a fire alarm this evening. However, if one sounds, please follow the officers to the fire exits and have the building's designated meeting point, which is the Civic Centre forecourt. Mobile phones to be placed on silent or switched off, and resident feedback forms are available in this room and also online underneath the broadcast. With that said, we move on to the main agenda, which is apologies for absence, please.
Apologies have been received from Councillor Exeter-Gohill, with Councillor Heena McWan substituting.
Thank you very much, and a warm welcome to Councillor McWan this evening. Item 2 is declaration of interest in matters coming forward this meeting. Are there any? I can see no indications. Thank you. Item 3 is to receive the minutes of the previous meeting, pages 1 to 4. Are we happy with those minutes? Thank you very much. I can confirm that all business this evening will be discussed in part 1, which move on to item 5, which is the consultation on the Council Strategy 2022 to 2026. And this evening we welcome Dan and Tony. Whenever you're ready, please give your presentations to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I know you like to keep a tight ship, so I shall be succinct. I'll just give an overview of the approach that we've taken, and then Dan will talk about some more detail before opening up for questions. So what you'll see from this is, I think, a marked change from any previous plans that have been before either this committee or any other, in so much as it's much more based around sort of high-level objectives and outcomes that we want to achieve for both residents and for the local authority, for the council. And there are twofold reasons for that, really. Sort of one is because we have taken a decided step towards moving and working in a much more of a sort of matrix way. So rather than we decide that just because Mark's doing a fantastic job in housing, that, good for you, Mark. If there's other parts of or other services that would benefit from working with housing that aren't receiving such a great service from it or whatever else. So we're looking much more about how we can work together across directorates in order that we can achieve better outcomes. And you'll have heard before about sort of people falling between the gaps of things, and of course that is precisely to avoid that. And the ambitions for residents and for the council you'll see set out in here, they're deliberately high level. There's no intention that they are about 10 of these, 4 of those, 5 of those, because this is about a 4-year strategy. So over the period of the administration, this is what we are seeking to achieve over that period. And then beneath that, as Dan will talk about, there'll be service level plans that are much more about that granular detail. So in this year we shall. So there'll be something very specific and defined. And then underneath that, there'll obviously be individual sort of performance plans related to each officer. So we'll have what has over the years been called many things, but golden thread is probably the most common one of them. So with that, I'll just ask Dan to sort of take us through just the various sort of headings and the different ambitions, and then we'll make an assumption that people have read it, and I'm sure you'll have lots of questions. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony, and good evening, committee. So if I spend a moment just walk you through the structure, there are, just to start with the vision, which you'll all be familiar with, we have 2 ambitions, one for residents and one for the council. And in terms of sort of positioning, that's a particularly important distinction that I'd just like to highlight, because one reflects place and one reflects, obviously, the organisation. It's about us and what we do. But the significance of that distinction is because we as a local authority have an important leadership role of place. So it's beyond the organisation. It's about working with partners. It's about working with businesses. It's about working with residents, so that actually we can improve the lives of our residents in many different ways and influence that. And obviously the ambition about the council is about how we can be an even better organisation and improve the lives of the residents through the work we do directly. The ambitions are then underpinned by 5 commitments to residents. I'll walk you through those. So we've got safe and strong communities, thriving, healthy households, a green and sustainable borough, thriving economy, and the one that's particularly important to us as an organisation in terms of how we operate is the 5th one, a digital-enabled, modern, well-run council. And as Tony has said, they're cross-cutting, they're not directorate-specific, they're about their outcome statements, how we can improve the lives of our residents working together. As Tony said as well, we've not been specific about targets within this document. There are outcome statements, directions of travel. In terms of the delivery of the strategy, it will be complemented by and underpinned by an annual delivery plan for the council, and then that will cascade into service directorates and then into teams, and then that will and then each member of staff will have their own individual plan, and then there will be that golden thread so that staff can see the work that they do every day, what it's actually contributing to in terms of the strategy. If I move on to the consultation process, so the consultation process commenced. It's running for 9 weeks. Commenced on the 8th of July, runs to the 9th of September. We have sought to make the consultation process as straightforward, as simple as possible. We've got some structured questions. It's an electronic survey. It's available on the council website, which we've been actively promoting through social media. We've also proactively contacted over 350 organisations, encouraging them to participate. And in addition, we've also contacted a number of residents, hundreds of residents, who have signed up for email communication and consultation activity with the council. We'll obviously consider those views once the consultation closes, and we will then finalise the strategy document for Cabinet in October and then for Council in November. But welcome any questions from the committee.
Thank you both for that overview. I invite questions from members. Could you please indicate? Councillor Gardner.
Here's the thing. How do you intend to interact with the hard-to-reach groups that we've got in the borough? And also, there are a lot of people who are reticent to get involved with IT facilities. People don't want to do things online. They don't want to receive emails. I mean, I'm ancient, but some people younger than me still don't want to do it. But what worries me on this, it's saying that you want to engage with residents, community groups, partners, businesses, things like that. If there are pockets of communities in the south of the borough, like the Gurkhas, for example, there's several of them are fragmented. So how are you going to get everything across to them? I mean, it worries me that we can sit here and we understand 99% of what's been said, but a lot of the residents haven't got a clue, and yet they rely on us to relate stuff to them. I don't know. Do you understand what I'm trying to say, basically?
So, you'll be familiar with quite a number of different communication and engagement groups that we have, Fiona Gibbs and Vicky Trott, and also through a whole range of different organisations as well. I won't pretend that it's perfect, and there's always further opportunities and room for improvement. But I think actually just engaging with community leaders, faith leaders, and working actually through ward councillors to promote, in this case, the consultation, but actually to be a voice and vehicle for actually what we are doing well and how to access services and support. And I suppose it has to be that collective effort, really, and seeking feedback actually on what is working well in terms of engagement and what isn't, and what we need to do differently. So we've got quite an open mind. In terms of the digital point, we've I checked the latest figures actually, as in hot off the press today, and we've got 81,000 residents who've signed up to the My Account within the borough. So this is the vehicle in which they can actually report concerns or access information. We will be looking to develop that further into an end-to-end tool so that they can complete basic transactions with the council, but recognising the fact that may not be the most suitable means for everybody in every case. We're not looking to completely, for example, switch off every single telephone line and every other means of communication. It's actually a complementary means or channel. And it's I suppose that high number of residents signing up to the My Account is a recognition that many of us actually do want to be able to engage with, in our case, the council in a very convenient way and in a very straightforward way for what is everyday type transactions. However, we know, and it's true of every council and every public sector organisation, this is an area where we need to continue to work hard to support residents, train residents and encourage them and give them the confidence and the skills to use the technology that's available to them or that's available in the community. So it is an area where there will continue to be some further work required, but I think it's encouraging to me that there are such a high number of residents who are engaging positively through a digital means, but full recognition that actually it will take time to fully support all residents.
Councillor Garner, would you like a supplementary before I move on?
What worries me again, and it's as an individual councillor, and you're probably exactly the same with every other councillor, is that we're the conduit between them and yourselves, and it's trying to instill the confidence in particular groups, sections of the community, so that they feel capable and able to actually communicate with yourselves without having to come via us. I mean, several of you on here see the workload that some of us have, and it's, to be perfectly honest with you, I love my residents, but it'd be really nice if they could actually get onto a computer and put in their own problems, because I just have to decipher what they're saying to me, basically, and then you, don't look at me like that, Mark, but you do get a lot of my emails, but I'm just trying to work out that it's, a lot of it is, we have somehow to promote ourselves, and I'm talking about the actual civic centre, the staff, so that we can give people confidence to be able to bypass us as councillors in some instances.
Thank you, Chairman. Couple of other dimensions, I think, to what Dan mentioned. First of all, in terms of, if I just lean over to the NHS for a moment, so you'll probably be aware that there's a whole lot of work across northwest London looking at sort of disparities and looking exactly into those harder to reach communities. And the reason the NHS have shone a light on that, a very strong light, is obviously because of the COVID sort of impact and looking at the different impacts of different groups. And so there's an awful lot of legwork that's being done by the NHS and in Hillingdon to understand those sort of different communities. And one of the things that they're looking at, or they want to look at, is the whole notion of health literacy. So, you know, how it is that residents from different communities understand the mechanisms by which they can access, in this case, sort of NHS services. Now, obviously, we're doing that work with them, and so we will piggyback in the same way that they will then piggyback on some of the things that we do in order to reach those communities. So I don't think it's just through the means that we already have, as Dan mentioned, through Fiona and others that are very in touch with those communities, but we're also, as a part of this, so underneath some of the commitments that you see in here, we've got approaches, for example, about being much more neighbourhood and locality based. So we're very much more designing services around the need that we understand in an area, rather than there is a service that works across the borough, irrespective of where you are, there's a service and you tap into it. This will be that, you know, a service in Hayes is going to look very different to a service in Northwood for the very different reasons of the different types of needs that there are and the different kinds of profile. And as a part of the development of those services, we've committed to going out and meeting residents. So that does mean, when I say we, I do mean me. I shall be going. I won't wear a tie. I'll be very accessible, and I will. But it's very important that we do that, because we have to hear. Because we'll make an assumption about, from the needs analysis that we've had, we'll make some assumptions about the means by which we think things are accessible. But then we need to hear. So we are planning to do it in this way, and we do intend for it to be much more of a dialogue that we approach, and that And that's an ambition I know of the administration. I've spoken to the leader about it. He's very keen that we do get down to that sort of locality-based understanding of service delivery. And much of what you'll see when we get down to the service plan level will go into some of that detail. You'll see some of the things emerging in the localities models that we're thinking about. Children and families already operate in some of that way. So I'm very confident about that. And just one other point about the digital. As Dan says, it's not about necessarily turning sort of other things off. It's about doing some of those things better. And one of the things that we've also recognised is the need to be a lot more on the front foot in relation to, and I know that one can interpret PR as being about spin. I don't mean it like that. I mean literally informing people about how they can be good consumers of council services through very many different means. And it's honest view. I'm not sure we've been terribly good at that. We've turned on services, but we've not necessarily promoted them as best we can. So again, we've recognised that, and only this afternoon I've been talking. Dan and I had a conversation about this yesterday because it's come up in a number of the other select committees that we've been to, and I'll be talking to cabinet members this afternoon about planning exactly that. So what is the information going to look like that's sitting around some of the things that we're developing? So I'm quite confident that in a year's time, when I hopefully come back here and you ask me some questions, that we'll be able to say, and here's some evidence of what we said a year ago.
Thank you very much. Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I would a question that's following up from that. This my account. I mean, geography-wise, do we know where people are located, where the high take-up is, and where it's lacking, and then how to promote that? That was just a sort of a thing I was asked about. I'm trying to sort of stick to what is the remit of the committee as best I can, but I know there's overlapping elements to this. In point 1, the final bullet point about tackling homelessness. Now, unless it's been retracted, as far as I was aware, there was a government ambition or pledge to end homelessness by 2024. So are we in this strategy being not as robust or sort of dedicated to that ambition that's coming from national government?
It's the target is to end rough sleeping by the end of this Parliament. Tackling homelessness obviously is a much bigger picture, with all the approaches from the evictions from the private rented sector, family evictions, etc. But the challenge the government has set us is our rough sleeping target. In Hillingdon specifically, we have set a target in our homelessness and rough sleeper strategy. We'll never get down to zero in Hillingdon, quite simply because of the Heathrow Airport. We've always got a churn or flow, as the official phrase is, through the airport. We had actually this afternoon we had our rough sleeper DLUC government advisor in this afternoon, just talking about the challenges we're facing over the next couple of years. We always know there's going to be a low number coming through, but we want to do everything we can. Certainly within the borough, we've set ourselves a target of 0. In borough, but we've told the government that Heathrow, as much as we want to reduce Heathrow to 0, there's going to be more of a challenge for us.
Councillor Farley. Yeah.
Thank you. Sticking with the first area, to enable more new homes to be available in the appropriate places. I wonder if that could be defined, please. And about the infrastructure that goes alongside that, GP, schools, etc., etc.
I mean, in terms of that particular point, that makes the important reference that we as a local authority have a responsibility, and we have obviously the local planning policy framework to ensure that, in fact, any development, not just residential accommodation, is placed in the appropriate place in the borough. So obviously we've got protected sites and land has certain status. The important point there is that we will enable more residential properties in line with our planning policies.
Councillor Farley also mentioned the analytics regarding the data for the website. I don't know if anyone wants to answer that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm pleased to say that we do actually monitor very closely the take-up of the My Account. And in fact, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, we shared with the cabinet member a sort of heat map really of by ward in relation to population, the take up of the My Account, and the significance of that analysis. It allows us to see where there's lower take up, and we're therefore designing with our corporate communications team a targeted information and engagement plan around lower take up areas in particular.
Thank you, Dan. Would that map be able to be shared with the committee through the clerk? Thank you. Councillor Smallwood.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies if I repeat myself slightly, Dan, but from last night, but I'll try and keep it to the remit of this committee. I just wanted to come back on digital poverty and the work the council intends to do around digital poverty. That doesn't necessarily always come in monetary terms, not being able to afford an iPad. It can also come in education and training terms, whether that be age or whatever other barriers there may be, and the work that we're going to do that is throughout it. How digital can be used potentially, to pick up on Councillor Gardner's point around helping hard to reach groups, possibly people that don't have English as a first language. Certainly with digital, it is a lot easier to engage people in their mother tongue or in other languages, whereas that may be slightly more difficult if you're calling the call centre. And then what we can do around sort of like the business elements of making things digital. I'm thinking things like planning and licensing, where really, in my humble opinion, that should be as online as much as possible. There's really no need for there to be anything else. So a few points there. Thank you.
Okay. So in terms of, I mean, we spoke last night, didn't we, about digital poverty? So, but I mean, it's I think just to acknowledge that there are obviously households, families in the borough who do find themselves in a situation where they may not be able to afford broadband or have the devices. And certainly we work very closely with West London partners and businesses, local authorities as well. And there are a whole range of different initiatives and schemes which are running to really ensure parity and access to digital, the technology and the digital services. So, for example, some of the broadband providers will have a social offer. And actually, there are other organisations, again, with working in partnership with West London, that can provide devices to families. So actually, it's about joining up the dots really to support families. So that's something that's actively being pursued and explored through our sort of digital citizen and access plan that we're in the process of developing. Which I suppose extends into the second question, which was about digital inclusion. And I think it's an important point, isn't it, that actually digital can actively promote inclusion and access to services with the right wrapper of support around. So that, again, it's about actually finding out well, in fact, just to give you an example, certainly during the height of the pandemic, we worked very closely with schools to enable devices to be provided to families to facilitate learning. And that, albeit was a government initiative, but actually working very closely with schools and families, social workers, it was a real success actually, and that's something that we're continuing to build on. In terms of services, we do have a really big ambition to be as digital as we can to offer that choice to residents. And as I mentioned last night, as I've mentioned about other committees, it isn't just about it's important not just the convenience and providing other options to residents to engage with us and resolve their business entirely electronically. It is actually about a mindset and a way of working that can improve the efficiency of the business within the council. So I gave the example last night that when I attended one of the select committees that when, for example, a resident applies for a service through an online application form, we can write a piece of code which that piece of code can then go and check automatically a whole range of different systems to gather up information to verify that application. So actually that can be happening overnight. So when the officer comes in the morning, 80% of the work is done. We can then improve the response to the residents so that we process applications faster and ensure accuracy first time.
Councillor Small, do you have a supplementary?
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered, obviously one of the flagship things that the council has is the Hillingdon First card, envied by councils up and down the country. In fact, it's that good. Harrow are now copying it. I just wondered how the Hillingdon First card, which is something that people really cherish and recognise, can be used to help enhance some of this, and whether it can go, what plans we have to sort of to build that into this plan.
One of the key work streams we've got within our digital plan is actually how we can make better use of the data that's available to us. I mean, we've probably all heard of the expression big data, but it's actually how can we squeeze more value out of that data to help understand, in that particular case, patterns of consumption and activity and demand from residents, in order that we can then provide an offer that better meets that need. And that's essentially, for me, it's one of our kind of key work streams, is to better understand the needs of our residents. And in that case, through the Hillingdon First card, what are the patterns of use? How does that change through geography over time? And are there new opportunities that we could use from the Hillingdon First card? What does it tell us about our residents as well? So that when we start to develop services based on, Tony mentioned the locality modelling, we can use some of that information at a very localised locality level, which gives us indications about preferences, so that we can design services that better meet needs.
Thank you very much. Councillor Punjar.
Thank you, Chair. I spoke about this the other night, so I'm going to, sorry to repeat myself again, but as you know, I really applaud visionary thinking and think it's good progress. However, there were a couple of things that I wanted to speak about really, which is to make sure that the movement into a digital framework is meeting the speed in which society is moving as well, and the demographics of the society, because we can all want to be as far digital as we can, but actually if our society is not progressing in the same way, then we're far removed from them. And that's really, really important because it defeats the object. The other thing I wanted to pick up on what Councillor Farley and Councillor Small were saying, and Councillor Gardner, on the My account and meeting these groups, is that, yes, by demographics, but also by age and ethnicity, because I think that gives you a real clarity on the kind of groups that aren't potentially going into the My account as well, and then maybe there will be an answer of why they're not doing it, because if we just go, 81,000 people is great, it's great, but if they're all living in a particular locality or they're a particular ethnicity or a particular age, then we're losing a whole group of people in that without actually exploring that. And the other thing about this is like this whole thing about safe, strong communities as well. It's really ensuring this word appropriate really needs to be defined, because appropriate according to your policies, is it appropriate according to the communities that live within in that locality as well? Because we are seeing buildings going up and up and up, and they're affecting residents, and the quality of living for those residents are not at fault of their own, but because of this overbuilding in certain places, because it might meet policy, but it might not meet the residents' needs, and that word appropriate really needs to be defined. And finally, what I'd like to say is that use this promotion of this vision and getting the feedback, and how can you use the councillors who are engaging with their community to actually go out, especially into these hard to reach groups. And I do agree that digital ways do help with language boundaries, but also they don't help with language boundaries, because my mum, who doesn't speak English as her first language, would struggle on an internet. And I know that people who come here people who are younger and are migrants over here who are still learning English, online stuff doesn't work. They need translators, they need to go in with people, so we live with Heathrow on our doorstep, so we can't kind of discount that area as well. Thank you.
We're going to fight over the microphone. So I suppose your first point was about, are we going to keep up to date, if I've kind of sort of paraphrased that, and actually so we really do have ambitions to provide those choices around digital to residents, and As I said earlier, the sort of high take-up of the My Account and the fact that it's being used as well does give me some confidence that actually we're creating tools which residents value. And as part of that suite of tools that's available. Certainly the My Account, actually it's a very similar point, I suppose, to Hillingdon First Card, actually, is using the information that we're starting to see and actually being curious and asking the right questions about, well, why is it that there's a lower take-up in some areas? And it's about understanding it. And actually, we probably need to accept that there may be occasions where we will never be able to, or be in a position to persuade a resident, or it may not just be appropriate, or it may be a community group where actually there's other means by which they wish to or prefer to contact the council. So it would be sort of positive encouragement at all times. And certainly through the work that we're doing, looking at the take-up of the My Account, we want to understand and engage with communities and residents why it is that perhaps they haven't considered the My Account as an option. And we completely recognise as well that digital, there may be barriers. Language may be one. It may be technical skills. There may be a whole range of other barriers. And certainly we would want to understand that better from communities as we do engage. And I suppose the point about appropriate, we'll take that on board, and we'll take that and consider that, see what we can do. I think that was everything.
Thank you. Councillor Punja, would you like to add anything further before I move on?
Just only how you could use councillors to promote this and get really good concrete feedback from the ground as well as from what you're doing.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. Resident benefit and consultation, a simpler one. It says the consultation will be carried out as or required. And it's talking about engagement with residents' associations. How will that be implemented? Will officers actually go to residents' associations to give a presentation and feedback, or will it be in libraries? Or
so thank you. We've contacted all the residents and community associations in the borough, and we're very open to attending a meeting and very similar presentation actually, and just talking through what we're hoping to achieve and encouraging engagement. So absolutely open to that suggestion in any group in the borough.
Councillor Sullivan.
Because it's going to be presented to the Cabinet in October this year. So does that mean September, nothing happens in August for the Residents Association. So will that be in September you'll be rolling it out?
Yeah. So from now onwards, right until the close of the consultation, we can absolutely do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm keen to move on to the next item because we've been discussing this for quite a while now. So we'll finish with Councillor Farley. If you can keep the questions and the answers brief, as we'll move on promptly after this one. Thank you,
Chair. Just on point 3 on the Green and Sustainable Borough, plunge feed is great. What I would like to see within the strategy is maintenance, because the hot weather aside that we've had, I have noticed that the maintenance of trees is something of an issue, particularly in the past, and I want to make sure that we are ensuring that maintenance is done. I know there's something coming in the work programme that's under the review with the contract, but it's to make sure that is done, because I just got a feeling that we plant trees and then they die, they'd be restricted and put new ones in, and it seems to be a bit of a bone of contention. Thank you.
Yep. And if I could just remind members as well, if you do have any other further questions that we don't have time for this evening, by all means please speak to Liz outside of the meeting, and she will liaise with the officers on your behalf and preferably share the answers with all of us outside of this meeting. Thank you both to Dan and Tony for your attendance this evening. We'll now move on to our next item, which is the Empty Properties, Council Tax Payment and Empty Dwelling Management Orders, pages 15 to 20. And we have a range of officers here this evening, so good evening to Maureen, Debbie, Mark and Ian. Whenever you're ready, please give your presentation.
course. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so I suppose Maureen and I are here initially just to kind of talk through the committee around the council tax premiums, the lever we've got in terms of engaging with empty properties in the borough, and sort of, I suppose, what we've got in place at the minute and how that could change going forward. And then I think colleagues from housing will pick up on the empty dwelling management orders after that. So within the report, we set out a bit of a history of council tax in terms of how it's interacted with empty properties. I think the first element I was just going to draw your attention to was that we've got this sort of almost 1,100 properties that are empty and exempt, but they're against sort of specific classes of, so where residents are in particular circumstances. So some of those are in terms of where they're potentially in social care accommodation, severely mentally impaired, to do with the sort of the process of bereavement and sort of so in these kind of areas, effectively, these are empty properties where there's, these are well outside the scope of any premium or anything. These are, it's recognised actually these properties are empty, and they're empty for a very good reason, and therefore, so the council tax system is designed to not penalise individuals in those circumstances. Historically, there was a broader range of reductions around properties that were held empty, but where we didn't hit these sort of particular criteria. Those reliefs have been sort of scaled back by the government in recent years as part of effectively to try and remove some of those maybe incentives within the systems holding properties empty when they could be better used in terms of delivering housing supply. And since 2013, we've had the power to apply the empty homes premium in those cases where actually we do recognise that these homes could be brought back into use, and actually this is an incentive, a lever that can be deployed by the council. So this power has been in place and being used. Since 2019, there's then been scope to raise that level. So it's one of those areas where sort of we keep it under review, and we're sort of looking to revisit in budget cycles each year. We didn't feel it was something to push during sort of the last couple of years when sort of the service has been dealing with the pandemic, as have residents, and so there's been a lot going on there in the background. But I think this is quite timely in terms of the committee sort of looking into this area and asking, because we're definitely keen to sort of revisit this and have a look back and see how potentially this mechanism within council tax can support the broader kind of approach the council's taking on empty homes in the borough. So happy to take questions. So when we get there, but I'll pass over to housing colleagues for the.
Okay, so I was just going to speak briefly about the empty dwelling management orders. So to put that into just a little bit of context, the previous committee to this, environment, housing and regeneration, commented first on our housing strategy, and were kind of instrumental in the kind of empty homes bit of the housing strategy being strengthened, and then there was a follow-up report to this to that committee that talked about the kind of various options around empty homes, and there was a sort of specific request to talk a bit more about empty dwelling management orders in this report. So we've put quite a sort of brief bit in there about what empty dwelling management orders are that enable the council to take over management of homes that are empty, and that can be on a sort of interim basis for I think that's just 1 or 2 years, 1 year I think, and the final order could be up to 7 years, and they are they're a useful tool that can be used in some instances, but not without some drawbacks. I think they're a tool that was really brought in and seen as a kind of last resort type of option for dwellings that have been empty for a considerable period of time. And there are some dangers and risks in using them, in that there can be difficulties in recovering the costs that you might spend on getting the property up to standard in the first place within the 7-year period that you've got. I think there are possibilities around extending, but it's quite a sort of complex and involved process. As a result of the housing strategy work, we've included an item within our first year action plan on the housing strategy to really completely review our approach in relation to empty homes, and that would be sort of across the board in terms of the types of incentives that are available and the enforcement action that we take. So that's really to try and do a kind of in-depth look really at what all of the options available to us are, and what those mean in terms of resources, both in terms of staff time and any capital funding that might be made available as well to help with those things, and really trying to understand which of the options available to us are most likely to bring the most benefit for the least resource required. and to see how those have played out in other areas. Returning back to sort of EDMOs again, I think the government doesn't collect statistics on how many of them have been used, so the only data that I've managed to find was sort of way back in 2012, and that really showed a very small number of EDMOs that had actually sort of gone through. And they are things that are used by some authorities, but they're not something that you would see as something that you're doing lots of empty dwelling management orders every year. I think the kind of general approach that most local authorities take, I think a lot of authorities have specific empty homes officers, and the approach is largely around concentrating on persuasion, advice, making sure there's lots of information available about reporting empty homes and about what we can do to help owners bring their properties back into use. And really to try and sort of target a little bit, as well as Dan was saying. I think there's more work that can be done around really understanding the picture of empty properties in the borough, where they become empty, how long they become empty, why they become empty, so that we can be a little bit more sort of targeted about our approach, and also be targeted in terms of those that have been empty for just a short period and those that are really kind of entrenched and have been empty for a long time. And I think it's those kind of long-term empties where then you are possibly looking at some of those harsher enforcement type actions, which would include the empty dwelling management orders, would possibly include compulsory purchase orders, and could possibly include enforced sales. But as I say, I think this is something that we need to really sort of dig into a bit further, because although obviously nobody wants to have empty homes, they are a wasted resource, they can have other problems for the communities as well, but none of the enforcement type options for dealing with empty homes are straightforward, and then none of them are without a resource requirement. So I think there is really a need to sort of dig into that a bit further before we propose an approach.
Thank you very much. At this point, I'd invite members to ask their questions. If you have a question, please indicate now. Councillor McWarner.
Thank you, Chairman. My question's around empty property charges on page 17 in particular is what I'm looking at. The second bullet point, it says properties undergoing structural repairs and refurbishment eligible for 100% reduction up to a year. I'm interested to know that do we undertake checks to make sure that we know when the structural repair has been completed? Just a bit more detail on that would be great. Thank you.
Actually, Councillor, that refers to the historic position. Currently, there are no discounts or exemptions for empty properties.
Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the unoccupied properties in Class F, where properties are left unoccupied following the death of an occupier. And then it says this exemption will last for up to 6 months following the grant of probate or letters of administration, after which the full council tax will become due. How will that be implemented? Because I have a property not far from where I am, and it's been unoccupied. The lady passed away 2.5 years ago. It's boarded up. So nothing has happened as far as I know.
As part of our administration of this, we obviously apply the exemption, and we require proof, obviously, of the death certificate, etc. And then we get in contact with whoever's responsible for applying for probate or getting the letters of administration. And once we've been advised by them that probate has been granted, so we monitor these cases regularly. I have a team that deals specifically with deceased cases so that they can monitor them. The issue sometimes is that there is some delay in some people applying for probate, or there's some dispute going on, and that obviously lengthens the process and then lengthens the exemption that's allowable, because the legislation says that we have to wait for probate before we recharge.
This particular property I'm referring to, the lady passed away and has no family, so what happens then?
well, we can make inquiries and have a look at the property, and yes, we can then apply to the probate office to find out if there's anything going on. But generally, and then obviously we look at the land registry records, so we have to undertake a bit more recovery activity in those sort of more difficult cases.
Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. I think it would be helpful with properties that are not occupied is to get I think this has been mentioned before, is to get a breakdown of the types of property we're looking at, because obviously there's a big need for certain types of property, 3, 4 bedroom houses. So we've got 163, says on page 18. Do we have the information about what the kind of breakdown is of the size of these properties?
The council tax records don't actually hold whether it's a house or a flat, but obviously the banding gives an indication of the size of the property depending on the area. So yes, we could get a breakdown of the bandings of these properties.
Councillor Farley.
Thank you. Yeah, it's more in sort of general terms across the board, as well as that where we have unoccupied properties. It's knowing, the makeup of it is very helpful, I think. But when we looked at this earlier in the year, also was which has gone into to some degree here, was the recovery of where properties have been found to be occupied when they had them previously listed as unoccupied, and sort of making sure that the council tax is recovered from that. And I mean, this goes into some detail about the process. I'm just wondering if you could sort of talk about around the area of the difficulty and the effectiveness of getting or recovering that debt that is due, because it's the way this is sort of written here is that there can be a drawn-out process on some of these. Thank you.
Well, I think Councillor Sullivan has indicated one particular case where we might find difficulty. First of all, the problem is with empty properties is identifying the liable party. So we may have to make inquiries with land registry, and then it's actually locating where that liable party is in order to take the recovery action against them. But obviously we pursue those things through the land registry and any other information that we can gather. We have an external inspections unit who can make inquiries, and they use such things as credit reference agencies to see if we can locate the liable parties. And once we have that, we then have a process, a statutory process we go through for the recovery of council tax. And so we will follow that through to the Magistrates Court to get a liability order. And once we obtain that, there are other methods of recovery that we can undertake, ultimately leading to maybe a charging order and forcing a sale of a property.
Any other questions from members? Okay. From my own perspective, I find it quite frustrating as a councillor. I've been a councillor for 12 years, and there are 3 particular properties in my ward that have been empty throughout the entire terms of office that I've held. Do you as officers feel that the legislation in place as it stands is sufficient to do your jobs effectively? And would you change anything either as an authority within our powers or what the government would do nationally to improve this?
Sorry, I can go, I suppose from the sort of the council tax, the revenues perspective. I think it definitely is frustrating in terms of their very limited levers that we have available. I think the empty homes premium certainly, is an extra stick, but I suppose in the context of if a property is being left empty, the extra say £2,000 a year, or if you really push that out in terms of how much we're charging, when you put that next to kind of I suppose the value of the unused house to the individual, if that's the way to put it, it's helpful. It's an extra lever, it's an extra stick we've got, but maybe it doesn't change their sort of economic assessment of whether or not to retain the occupied property. So I think we're definitely limited, even if we sort of revisit and look at levels of empty homes premium. We're definitely limited in terms of the extent to which we can apply those levers through the revenue system. and I'm not sure we've necessarily got anything as officers that we could see that we could do like within the existing system, or indeed how to sort of change that system. It probably loops back round to, and hopefully a nice segue to kind of maybe some of those more kind of housing policy levers in terms of what we can do. There may be scope longer term that things like the empty homes premium maybe give us a mechanism to potentially finance some kind of measures, things that we can do that maybe we do need to kind of step up enforcement or some other kind of steps though.
Just to add, I mean, as we've set out in the paper, we do want to draft an empty property strategy this year as part of the work in the housing strategy, and that'll just set out what we can do with existing resources. I think councils have always struggled that there's various powers in place, but it can get very complicated very quickly. And from first-hand experience, we've tried to track owners of properties. Before we know it, we're going abroad, and you've got officers sort of spending days and weeks on casework. And so for us, and as part of the work we want to do this year, is actually look at, well, what does that mean? What is that spend to save? What is that investment that we need in order to bring these properties back? Because, I mean, your example of the properties being empty for 12 years, I mean, that's something we do have to address. We just can't leave these properties empty. And the comment around we need these 3 and 4 bedroom properties back. The powers are there. It's just trying to understand actually the resource implications for us and how we can put that into practice.
Thank you. And just one final question, actually, on the issue of safety. I mean, a number of these have been empty for a number of years. Given the terrible incidents of Grenfell and things like that, I mean, these are fire hazards, surely. Do we have powers as an authority to do more in that sector as well?
Yes, there are. There are bits of work. We commonly, unfortunately, we do quite a lot of work on clearing front gardens, specifically when it comes to overgrown trees, etc. And of course, once we do that, we put a charge on a property. And that's theoretically, once you put a charge on a property, you can go for an enforced sale. And so actually there are powers open to us, but actually the process can just take time, and as I say, can become very complicated. But yes, I mean, our antisocial behaviour and investigation team are far too commonly actually sort of going out and doing some work on properties, clearing trees, and making sure properties are safe. And as you say, we don't want that, especially with the hot weather this week and what we saw in the paper, and what we saw across London. It makes it more important that actually we do this piece of work.
Thank you. Councillor Punjab.
Thank you, Chair. It clearly is quite cumbersome, this work. And I just wondered if there was kind of an insight into the success rate that you have in how many you have in how many leads you're following up, and then how much of that actually is successful within a year in the revenue that you bring back. And following on from the safety of these houses, does anything ever then lead on to another issue, which is squatters and squatting rights, and does that actually become into effect for empty properties that are around as well? I don't know if that has an impact on how you deal with things.
We don't tend to get squat. I mean, it's famous last words there. Yeah. But yeah, no. I mean, obviously, it's very difficult to squat in residential properties at the moment, and that's so we don't see a problem. We don't see a problem with that. But in regards to sort of the revenue collection.
Well, in terms of bringing properties back in, every year we carry out the exercise that we've documented in relation to the new homes bonus. And at the moment, there's an exercise ongoing, and I checked this morning, 157 properties that are quoted in here as Band C have actually been brought back in since June. So they are occupied, so that's an update on figures. And 4 of the 163 long-term empty premium cases have been brought in, and we've not completed the exercise yet, so hopefully that will improve by the time that the new homes bonus work is done in September.
Follow-up you have?
Only to say that it clearly shows 4 out of 163. That's cumbersome work, isn't it? That's a lot of effort, a lot of resources put in for bringing that money and bringing that property back into it. clearly needs to be more powers put in, or legislation that supports your work as officers here. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you. If I could also just add, there's a number of departments across various departments that you'd have to work on the same projects together. What's your relationships between different departments? Do you sit down together regularly to meet, to discuss, here's the list of properties we have, this one, this one, this one? How do you delegate, these different tasks between you?
So we do. So we've got quite well established sort of mechanisms between sort of our sort of revenues and fraud teams in terms of engaging, and actually in fraud are one of those areas where we can call in some of that additional information, so additional intelligence to try and sort of work out what we can target. We also sort of commonly share information on empty properties between council tax, sort of revenue services, and housing colleagues as well. And I think really sort of it potentially is one of those areas we can look at whether or not, in the new world of maybe sort of looking at how we use data, how we join things up, whether or not this is something that we can build on in terms of. But I think where we've run into trouble before, as Biz alluded to, is the powers we can then use to kind of take that forward once we've shared the information.
If there's no one else to ask a question, I'll just ask another one then. What was it? I've forgotten now. It was something to do with the report, and I'll come back to it in a minute. Okay. Councillor Smord,
I'll try and help you out there, Chair, by sort of sticking an interlude question in. I just wondered if there was work done around, especially either talking to local stakeholders, councillors, people's neighbours, whether that kind of work is done to try and pick up information. I mean, it might not work in Councillor Sullivan's case, but you never know. You might knock on the next door neighbour's door and they go, "Oh yes, I know their cousin," or whatever it may be. And what work is done to almost on a micro level to try and support some of the work that you do?
Certainly in terms of our sort of discussions about where we go with the strategy moving forward, we've talked about we have sort of ward panels where one of our colleagues goes out regularly and talks to people about issues within their area, and we were talking specifically about how we can make sure that empty homes is included within that. And also we talked about really looking at the kind of mechanisms that there are for getting people to report empty properties, and how we might improve that and improve communication around it as well.
Councillor Smord?
So and I don't know whether this is in legal or within the remits of what we can do. Is there a possibility that you can get residents to almost give you information? I mean, I'm not saying necessarily publish a list of the empty properties, but almost like go, here is a way, if you know some information about a property you know is empty, contact us with the information that you've got. And how do we do that at the moment, or is it something that we'd consider doing in the future?
I think certainly we've talked about getting residents to bring forward information about empty properties or potentially empty properties. I mean, certainly in terms of publishing lists, that's not something that we would want to be entertaining at all, really, because I think if it's sort of out there and it's known that properties are empty, then you're inviting all sorts of other potential difficulties as well at the same time. But certainly kind of publicising how people can let us know when properties are empty, I think that would be a good idea.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Smord, for giving me the time to remember what it was I was going to ask. It was very similar, actually. So the reports of all these empty properties, where was most of these coming from? Are they resident-led? Are they from members, councillors? What's the breakdown of these reports? Where do most of these inquiries come from? And the second point, which I think Councillor Smord mentioned, was reporting an empty property isn't really a great experience. When I look through the website, there's no icon say report an empty property here, type your postcode in and put this address in. I think we need to work on that and make that a bit easier for the public to report empty properties. I think the more leads we get on that without having to go out to look for them, we can get them from residents themselves, would be a lot better and make the work, hopefully for the officers, a lot easier.
And basically, I think we agree it's something that we need to improve on. I think really at the moment, I think most of our information is actually from council tax. That's where our sort of main information comes from in terms of what's empty.
Can I just add as well that obviously councillor inquiries are invaluable, actually coming in, notifying us of, because a lot of the times you are our eyes and ears in your wards, and actually the information you give us really can be key sometimes, and so we still would encourage you to tell us as well.
Councillor Gardner?
Actually, this is a bit of a story, but as some of you know, I'm part of a housing association, but one of the properties next door to me has been empty. Well, it's not now, it's got tenants that have been empty for some considerable time. And there was a couple of ladies creeping round the premises. And I'm being a bit nosy. I went out and sort of said, what's going on? And they said, do you know if anybody lives there? I went, no. I mean, no, I knew that people weren't living there. I said, can you give me your name? And I told her. She sort of jumped backwards. It was hilarious. And she said, are you sure? I said, I promise you, I am Councillor Janet Gardner. And she went, oh, okay, wandered off. But it was just, I mean, no, in fairness, she was checking up whether the place was still empty, and because you get a discount, don't you, if there's work going on. I mean, it was just sitting there. I mean, the work has now been done and they're being let, but it was just really funny. Sorry, it's got nothing to do with anything really.
Past the time. And one more thing as well. We did mention on the on the last time we discussed this about housing associations who probably have the same problem with empty properties, and we discussed our relationship with them and whether we were working together to identify empty properties, but also opportunities to try and bring those back into use and to liaise with those who are on our waiting lists. Has there been any progress since then?
Yes, I mean I can't name the housing associations individually, but yes, we've got an active programme now of meeting with our housing association colleagues on a number of issues as well. I also, as part of my role, I chair the West London lettings and allocation group, and so that's attended by all of our larger housing associations too. So we've got a big project that we're trying to do in sort of West London and in Hillingdon about the right properties for the right people. So there's a number of project streams: empty properties, under occupation, overcrowding, and how actually it's just the best use of stock. So yeah, there's a lot of work going on as part of our as part of our housing strategy, as part of our rough sleeping and homelessness strategy. It all leads to sort of that larger and more leadership role in how we engage with our housing associations. If you think that we're a stockholder of 12,000, our HA is bringing another 7,000, give or take, into the borough, so they're a key partner for us going forward, as we've discussed before.
Thank you. That's encouraging to know. So the recommendation is that we note the reports. I do feel there is the opportunity to increase the levy to 200%. I think that needs further work. I know we're only noting it this evening, but I think as a committee we should keep it under review and maybe look at it again in the near future. I know, as you said, you're working on your empty property report, so that'll be interesting as and when that comes back before this committee, and maybe we can make some recommendations then by way of a review. But thank you for your time this evening, and with that said, there's no further questions. Oh, Councillor Punja.
Do you think, Chair, that we could actually like to see the strategy once it's ready as well, because that would be just good information for us to, if we're going to review later as well, do you think?
No, I agree. Yeah, if the committee's happy for that, we can add that into the work programme to come back at a later time, perhaps. Thank you very much. We'll move on now to our next item, which is the Select Committee's Review, Policy Review, Discussion and Guidance, pages 21 to 23. Can I again thank members for their suggestions at the last meeting, which have been shown in this report. This is really just the opportunity to add any further comments on that. If we're able to do so, we could select a topic this evening. However, if we do need a bit more time, and if there are indeed more suggestions this evening, we can go away and look at those and come back in September with some further information and give us a better position to agree on a topic to review. Happy to discuss. Any comments? Councillor Gardner?
Something that's happened, I don't know. I'd like some review on the maintenance issues and in terms of tenancy management, and you know where they have the thing, what's it called? Oh, come on, Janet, get your brain in gear. When people need, after X amount of years, they'll get new kitchens or new bathrooms and the right things like that. Yeah. We've got a hard and fast rule, so I don't know how many years it is for each thing, but surely there should be some leeway, because it depends on how many people are living in the property. As I say, I mean, the classic thing is I've got a 2-bedroom house, people living there. I don't have children running about screaming and ripping the kitchen doors off, things like that. So my house is relatively okay, but what about a family would be in the same house, the same size property, if they had 2 or 3 children that are opening and closing doors? I am a mother. I can remember the times when the children would be climbing up on drawers to get to things and that sort of thing. I was just trying to work out if there's some sort of leeway that we can have, so that different sized families get a different sort of, I don't know, I'm trying to think how it can be phrased. So if there's a couple living in the property and I think it's 10 years or however for the kitchens, the bathroom renewal, that's okay. But if you've got maybe a mum and dad with 3 or 4 children, couldn't that be done sooner?
Yeah, I get the point you're making, Councillor Gardner. Another example perhaps is double glazing, for example. That goes on I think it's a 10-year list or something like that. And what you're saying is if the resident is vulnerable, perhaps an elderly person, maybe they should get more priority over just having a standard waiting time. Actually look at it and say, actually, that person is very vulnerable, and if they had very old windows that have not been replaced, then maybe they need to be pushed up the list a little bit further. But yeah, I take that point. It's a good idea. Councillor Smallwood?
Thank you, Chair. If I could start, I wondered if we could add to the work programme something around the impact of HS2 on resident services. We now are at a stage with HS2 where we are heading into construction mode. I fully recommend any councillor getting down onto one of the sites. Whether you be for or against HS2, the tunnel boring machine is an engineering masterpiece for anybody that wants to go. But I certainly think the impact it's having, certainly on wards in my ward and in neighbouring wards around parking and traffic and other issues is big, and we are at a stage where it is being constructed, so it may be worth having a one-off item, if possible, on that. I did mention last time about parking and modern enforcement, and I am still keen at some point we do a review, but I do note on our work programme that we have got an ASB service transition progress update in September, and then we do have it as a one-off item in February of next year. I think from the outcomes of that, we may consider having that as another, not maybe this one for this topic this year, but in a future topic we may from those two. I would like to make a pitch, and certainly from colleagues opposite and on this side, and this should never be part of political, about homelessness post-pandemic or rough sleeping. I think we could do an incredibly powerful review looking at that, whether that be the impact on this borough's proud record of supporting our veterans and the impact homelessness has on our veterans, whether that be around what work we can do with Heathrow to some of those, they call them some of those people that are go in and out of Heathrow, but also just in general, we should try and eliminate homelessness where possible, and I think that could be a very powerful piece, and we actually have a very interesting opportunity in this borough to look at that, or not just on the basic level, but on many levels. And that would be my suggestion, but obviously we don't have to decide tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Smallwood. I do agree, and the HS2 one, it is a very important issue, but when I look at the scorecard, I'm trying to think what recommendations you would make out of a project that's already ongoing. Certainly as an information item, by all means, but as a major review, I can't see any mileage in it, pardon the pun. Yeah.
Chair, just to be clear, I was just asking that to be added as a one-off to the work programme. I was not suggesting a review.
I'm more than happy for that if the committee's happy to.
But the review I'm suggesting is around homelessness.
Homelessness, yep, got it. Councillor Friday, did you indicate? Apologies for not quite. I thought one of you did. Councillor Punch, sorry. There we go. It's a late night now.
Just in light of the strategic climate change, climate action plan that we've got scheduled for, I think it is October. Am I reading this right, or September? I just wondered if we could have, I don't know, I'm new to this, so I don't know if it's a review or what it is, but just an understanding of what the Council's climate adaptation plan is, especially because we have the climate mitigation plan, which is going to net zero by the government, and we need to think, and now we also have a climate adaptation plan nationally, but it's quite clear that as beforehand we were looking at extreme weathers in the winter, we are now looking at extreme weathers in the summer, and that does affect resident services. It affects how we manage our services, how it impacts. I know it's cross-cutting across a lot of things, but I just wondered, like for example, we have Heathrow on our doorstep. We'd have to look at the kind of tarmacs we use. We have to look at the kind of housing structures we use and the building materials we use. And I know that this has been something that ministers have been talking about quite openly in the last couple of days on broadcast, and being quite massive environmentalist, I really believe that it's something that we should be looking at to just make sure that we understand our climate adaptation plan as councillors, and also that we are able to ask questions on how it affects our services and our residents.
Thank you very much. You're correct. It's October the 19th that's going to be brought before this committee. I think maybe it might be best to wait until then to see what the officers have to say, and then if you can ask all the questions, and if anything comes out of that you wish to add, rather than do it now and have that report later when we're halfway through the review. But certainly a good idea, Councillor Bridges. Yeah, I agree. Councillor Sullivan, did you indicate?
Alligates.
Oh, okay.
That's weird. It's ugly head. Alligates, yeah.
No, alligates.
Not alligators.
It's worse, Councillor Gardner. She said alligates.
Not alligators. Alligates, where council. I think this was implemented 10 years ago, wasn't it?
I think 2007, before my time, but yeah.
It's where people have got together and bought the plot of land, if my understanding is, and the council a gate has been put up, so the residents are responsible for clearing rubbish and things like that. And then they have a key. Each resident has a key in the area. But people have died or moved away and taken the key with them, so nobody knows who the key holder is. So we're having problems there where you've had one on where caravans have parked up, and I had two attempts to clear rubbish with the ASBIT team. There were mattresses piled high, and foxes had been attacking them, and rats and things. And they're in people's back gardens. So that needs to be addressed, I think, and looked at, because the council don't actually have a list of every key holder. There is a list, but it doesn't cover everything. So I just wondered if that could be talked about or considered.
Thank you. Any comments, or Councillor Small? I see your finger moving.
Yeah, I agree with everything Councillor Sullivan has said. I think that is something where we could have put it in our work programme as a one-off item, and try and bring officers in to understand exactly what is going on, and on the back of that potentially build on it further.
If memory serves, I think we had an information item on the old committee, RESPOC, with alligating. If members are happy for me to liaise with the clerk outside the meeting and just find that previous item that we looked at, 'cause it was I think it was in the last couple of years. I think Helena Webster came to the committee to give a presentation on it. Was you on it?
Looked at Keith Burrows.
I recall
committee.
looking at it as well. I think a number of committees.
But it was kicked into tall grass. Nothing happened.
Okay. Let me look outside at the meeting and see what we've done previously, and I'll liaise with the Labour lead as well and see if we can do some work on that, and if we need to bring that before the committee as a major review or as an information item again, we'll look into that as well.
There was just one more. Sorry to be a nuisance. To let signs, when they're displayed, evidently they're supposed to be taken down after 14 days, but there's one house not far from where I live. Every month it's put up, and it's there for 2-3 months, so I've got to raise a members' inquiry for them to actually get it removed. When John Riley was Councillor Riley was the cabinet member for this particular area, he did write, I think with Raj's help, the legal side of things, and wrote, I believe, to all estate agents telling them that they'll have to be removed after 14 days. But I think it stopped there. I don't think councillors were informed. So it's sort of, I was informed because I sort of spoke to Councillor Riley, but I don't think anybody else was informed. So I don't know if anything can be done on that score.
It's a good suggestion. I would probably widen the scope on that and just say fly posting in general with, I mean, the amount of fly posting around traffic lights, for example, we clear them routinely, but do we actually follow up with enforcement and find these companies or businesses that are doing it? I don't know. But it's a good idea. I think we could add that in as a possibility. Councillor Smallwood?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, I missed one of my points. I was looking at the Council's plan, which we were kindly spoken to about earlier, and under Thriving Economy, page 14, just for colleagues' reference, it says support thriving, multi-purpose, viable town centres, including creating a new master plan for Uxbridge. I just think we should put that on our radar, because if that does happen, I think that is a really obvious one for a major review. That would be something that would be huge. So, whilst it might not be for now, I certainly think we should be in our long-term thinking over the term of this administration, thinking about that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Farling?
Thank you, Chair. Sort of, what Councillor Smallwood is saying about the homelessness, certainly agree. It's something that is huge. I'm wondering whether we can combine the housing services, the mystery shopper type thing, because I mean, you're homeless or you're in a situation where you're becoming turfed out of your private rental. It's a trauma. I want to make sure that we're doing all the situation with homelessness and with people that are under situations where they're in such distress, making sure that whole process is as kind and sympathetic as we can possibly make it. Because I'm aware, I'm not saying necessarily with this council, but that I'm aware of the trauma that people, they're coming from domestic abuse, they're coming from situations where the no fault of their own, they're out. And we'll make sure, if that's something that maybe we could look at combining those in some way, and that we look at the homelessness, but we also look at our sort of end to end, particularly when people present to the council, that we're or the council is giving all the support and the sympathy and the constructive ways to get them rehoused. I think that would be quite valuable because it is a trauma for people.
Anyone else? Sorry, go on, Councillor Punjab.
I don't know if this is even within our remit, but it's something that's really been bothering me for...
Give it a go, you never know.
You never know. Deliveroo drivers and parking spaces. The Deliveroo drivers on our high streets are taking over all the parking spaces continuously for shoppers, and they don't take parking tickets. They just actually drive and they're just taking over spaces and spaces and spaces. And I don't know if this is within our remit or something that we can look at, but you know, they need to have either their spaces, they need to be limited, they need to be moved on after a certain... I mean, today I saw 20 motorbicycles and taken over 3 car parking spaces, and when there's only 6 there, and it just doesn't really help.
I think Councillor Smallwood raised that suggestion previously, and I think given his suggestion about parking services in general, maybe it could be merged into one, but go on.
Yeah. Chair, I think obviously I've spoken about the homelessness thing, but I think my suggestion was that we are getting an ASB service transition progress update in September. We are also looking at this under, I believe, and this is when I spoke on it at the last meeting, and I agree with Councillor Punja, under parking and modern enforcement, and I think the modern enforcement bit is the rise in delivery drivers. So it may be one for, 18 months down the line, once we've got those two things, we've got the evidence, this committee's built some evidence or questions from officers, we can then potentially have it as a review topic. But it's certainly something that is high on my mind as well as a ward councillor. When I find that I have shops being fined for inappropriately but accidentally putting up signs selling flags during the Jubilee and getting a fine, yet up and down Ruislip High Street I'm finding Deliveroo drivers not being then fined for parking in the wrong spaces, it becomes very frustrating.
Thank you very much. I think the antisocial team are going to have quite a list when they come to this meeting, so I think, Liz, if we can just keep records of what we're discussing ahead of their visit to this committee, so that they can be given these notes in advance and they can include it in their reports. I think that might be the best way forward, and then hopefully we can stick to what we've discussed previously rather than forgetting about any particular issues. Okay, so the steerage I'm sort of getting from these discussions is the homeless people, and the housing repairs as two potential topic reviews. Is there a majority around this table for one in particular, or do we need to go away and come back in September to drill down more on the scoping of both of these? I can see no indications, so I think in that case, if we can look at it outside of this meeting between now and the next one, and we can make a decision between those two in the September meeting, if we're happy with that. And in the meantime, the other suggestions, if we can look to add those in on our work programme, if we're able to do so, that would also be beneficial. Okay. Liz, did you want to add anything? Sorry, you've been writing away.
No, that's absolutely fine. I think we've covered off all the points that we already had previously raised, and obviously we've got some additional ones which can go on as information items with a view to potentially being scoped out as review topics further along the line. But I'm quite happy that with the homelessness and housing repairs suggestions, which we can explore further with yourself and the Labour lead.
Okay.
And then we can talk to officers and see where we are with those. Come back in September. Okay,
thank you very much. Item 8 is our forward plan. Are there any comments or questions based on that? No? Councillor Sullivan? Can you use a microphone, please?
Local list of buildings and architectural historic importance. We've got James Roger there, who's now left the council, and also page 043, Cabinet Meeting Local Flood Risk. We've got Vicky Borman still there, and James Roger. Sorry.
No need to apologise. Thank you for raising it, and we'll certainly have a look at that. Thank you.
That's all.
Thank you very much. The last item for this evening is our work programme, pages 41 to 44. Based on our discussions this evening, that is subject to change slightly, to include and change things around a little bit, but not too drastically. Are there any comments or points of clarity on that, or are we happy to note? Okay. In that case, thank you very much, everyone, for your attendance this evening. That concludes our business for tonight. May I take the opportunity to wish you a nice summer break, and I'll see you all on our return in September. Thank you very much.